This episode of the Stockbury Dark is brought to you by Shop Shogun. Shop Shogun is your one-stop shop for the latest and greatest in punk, hardcore, and heavy metal merchandise. Officially licensed web stores from bands such as 100 Demons, Integrity, Disembodied, Madball, Agnostic Front, and many more. The Stockbury Dark, along with Shop Shogun, are offering a special code to discount your next order when you use it on their website. Use the promo code SDPODCAST to save 10% from your next order from Shop Shogun. Again, the code is SDPODCAST. Their website is shopshogun.com. Also, check out their page, Shop Shogun, on Facebook and at Shop Shogun Merch on Instagram. Hello and welcome to the Stockbury Dark. My name is Peter Morrissey.
My name is Klaus.
And today, hey Howie, how you doing?
All right.
Today we have Howie Pyro with us. For what are we on, episode 18, Klaus, or 19?
Yep.
And this Howie Pyro from D-Generation, who also played in Danzig, host of Intoxica Radio, and there's a whole other list of accolades that go along with his name. Good morning, Howie. Howie, how you doing today?
It's the first day that's like kind of cold, so it's like it's very weird.
Yeah.
And the subject matter is funny to talk about. I can't remember feeling this feeling. There's just been like one massive heat wave in LA here where I am for months on end, like even up until yesterday.
That's my ultimate nightmare for me.
Yeah, and then it just turned, and my air conditioner broke in the middle of it, of course. And it just turned cold, like tonight. It's like 5 a.m. right now, so it's my usual sort of bedtime. But
yeah, we thank you for staying up so late for us. You know, we're all on opposite ends of the world, West Coast, East Coast, and then out in Sweden. So it's tough to coordinate three humans from all over the place at the same time. So we
just did it.
What's that?
I said
we just did difficult?
It.
No, not usually. We usually have someone that's closer in the area to us, so you know. But This is totally fine. I make the sacrifice for the love of the craft of the podcast.
There you go.
Yeah,
me too. So let's do it.
No, I think we've recorded with people from all over at this point.
Yeah, definitely have. So Howie, you were introduced to us by Max G. Morton, who is a great friend of mine, and Klaus. He was was a guest on one of our previous episodes. And
I did hear his episode, actually.
Oh, did you?
Before
right.
You guys asked me, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But once you guys asked me to do it, I didn't want to hear any of them anymore. Mm-hmm. But I did hear his. I forgot.
Yeah, so Max...
Yeah, we were roommates for many years in the 90s in New York. One big horror story.
Yeah, I'm sure there's... Max had so many great and bizarre stories, and I know it's almost like a never-ending well with him, where he would be like a reoccurring guest on the show. And then when he mentioned that we need to get you on the show. He said you have even much more wild things to talk about, and we're like, we got to get Howie on the Stockbury Dark. So here we are, months later.
I wish I had thought more along those lines. I should have asked him what he was talking about. But it's good to be here nonetheless.
Yeah, he also brought up a lot of his childhood stories and upbringing and a lot of crazy, things from his life.
I mean, I think those kind of stories stay with you a lot more. They leave a really heavy impression. Like one of the stories I have, it was so huge. I mean, I still have the thing I'm going to talk about, and I drew a comic book about it. You know what I mean? Like when I was 12 or something, and like it was really became mythological to me. So stuff from the childhood is weird. And I was up, instead of actually going to sleep when I should have, I was up looking for this stupid book that in one of the stories is about, but I couldn't find it.
What was the comic?
Not the comic, but the actual book. Me and my friend, I had this friend, I guess when I was around 12, named Jay, and we would, it's when I really first was going out on my own and looking and collecting weird stuff. Which, I mean, I have not changed one iota since I was probably about 10, which is good and bad, depending on who you ask. But we were in an antique store in Queens, and where I grew up, and in New York, and I picked up some odd-looking book that had I was looking for satanic stuff, I guess. And the book looked kind of religious, and then a whole bunch of paper fell out of it that was handwritten, and it seemed really creepy. And I looked at some of it, and it kind of scared me. So we went up and found a few different things, and I asked about the book, and the lady made this, like some old lady, and she made this very long face, and she said that it came with a bunch of stuff from a man that committed suicide.
Wow.
And I pushed the papers back into the book, and I bought it for like $1 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, nothing crazy or ghostly happened with it, but we started reading this book, and the guy was crazy, and writing stuff that, pages and pages of raving that was in the book, you know what I mean? And it was just really, really, it still scares me. There's so many times in my life I was going to burn that book because I blamed it on things, But I remember at one point I was drawing a lot of comic books, and I drew like a horror comic about two kids that find that book in an antique store, and then they, the guy comes back from the grave and blah blah blah. You know what I mean? But
how were you able to read out the notes that were in the book?
Yeah. And it was just really weird. I really wish I could have found it, because they're still in there. But it was a Jehovah's Witness book, as it turns out. I found out years later. And you know how people who are crazy sort of a lot of times attach themselves to different religions.
Yeah.
As just looking for something. You know what I mean? So that makes sense. But yeah, the book was all about like life and death, and I mean the writing and Even now, I think it would freak me out to look at it. You know, I haven't looked at it in many, many, many years, but I did come across it. But it's funny because another thing that I found that I also still have hanging on my wall, I thought we were going to be on a camera, but I can send you a picture of it.
Yeah, any pictures you have, you can always send over to us, and we can post up on the website and give visuals to our listeners.
Like antique, maybe probably from the 1800s. What is that called? What kind of molded, like not molded, but like a definitely I'm so tired. Definitely made, you know, to buy. It wasn't like a handmade thing, but it was a very old, beautifully crafted. I'm trying to think of the name of what are old dolls' heads made of? You know, like ones from the 1800s, like a kind of
usually like porcelain, I think, or
something. It's like a porcelain
or a ceramic
child, like young boy's head with devil horns.
Really?
And it had, and I was shook it, and something was inside, and we finally got that out, and it was a knuckle bone.
From a human or an animal?
I think it's a human knuckle bone, and which also created endless weird stories. I'm trying to think of like something more sort of ghostly. I know that we have one time on acid, we were taking Polaroids in the 80s. I have got to see if I can get a copy of this photograph. But in the photo, and not only when we were on acid, but in one of the photos, there's like all these people in the photograph. And it's really, really, really weird. Recognizable and unrecognizable. And I always wondered about, we thought one of them was Timothy Leary, so we brought him the photo.
You brought the photo to Timothy Leary?
Yeah, and he was having like a debate with, who was it? Someone really cool, like, what's his name? Robert Anton Wilson, maybe, or something. And we brought him the photo and had a long discussion, and he totally believed that it was him, of course, in the photo.
Yeah.
And but we talked a long time about how you know, you can capture, and I do kind of think that it's, you know, probable and possible that you can capture ghostly images and stuff like that on film. Have you ever had anyone talking about anything like that?
We haven't really touched on any like capturing of ghosts on film with many of the listeners yet, but that's something I've always been interested in. Just myself traveling around and going to a lot of the local like haunted cemeteries and taking pictures there and having things show up on film. I've never, just in standard film or picture taking in any kind of a setting, I've never had anything I've seen that was bizarre that showed up in the backgrounds.
Because it's funny how
any pictures.
If you're on acid, you would think, you know, if four people were on acid and their heads are all shook, they're in a photograph, and the energy coming out, you know, even just the thought and energy coming out of their heads, even imaginary or not, it probably would create some kind of weird. Because you know, Polaroid film is so strange. I'm sure someone must have written about it at some point, but you know,
Right.
it's not the same as regular film. It has all kinds of its own qualities that are really off.
Yeah. And as it develops, you know, I've seen a lot of like distorted images on Polaroids when I was a kid growing up, like stretched faces and weird lighting, and who
Yeah.
knows with the camera speed and what it captures on there, you know.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I used to have I always wish I kept this somehow, but I obviously couldn't. But there was like a shitty wood paneling in the kitchen in my parents' apartment where I grew up, and there was a face in the wood paneling that I used to stare at forever. Like my parents lived there from before I was born until I was, you know, 40 or something. So in this tiny apartment, and you know, that face, I could walk in there right now if it was there, and you know, walk right up to that face. And
Yeah. I mean, once you see something like that, there's no letting go of it. There's like things like that when I was growing up in my family's house where, you know, I would see things like that in the floor or out the window in different shapes. And once you see it, you couldn't unsee it. And so I get that. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. But I'm trying to think of not obvious stuff. Like, you know, obviously I've seen lots of people die.
I'm sure there's a lot of talk, you know, even on your Wikipedia page of you and Sid Vicious, which is a crazy story in itself to me. I don't know if that's anything you want to touch on or if it's just old news to you, but I know a lot of people that are listening would be interested in hearing something like that, if that's something you would want to talk about.
Yeah, it was very weird. That whole thing was very weird because you know, the whole situation was so surreal, you know what I mean? Like it didn't seem out of the ordinary to me, even at 18 or 19. But when I look at it now, it's been almost it'll be 40 years that he died in February. You know, I guess it was like sort of being in the Manson family or something. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
the way it's talked about on TV, and still, you know what I mean? And having done all those documentaries recently, where I have experienced very intensely the lying factor. And which then makes me very, very, very wary. And I love stuff like this, and I read stuff like this all the time, but very wary of the stories and the people telling the stories.
When you say the lying factor, you mean like there was a lot of truths that were stretched out, or from people that...
You know, some of the people involved, you know, there's one guy involved who, like, I was just put it on my Facebook page because I don't know why this would have popped up on my, of all people, YouTube page, but like the next thing that popped up after I watched something was the Sid Vicious Final 24 TV show. You know,
was that a show?
Yeah, you know, there was a show called The Final 24 or something, about the last 24 hours of people's lives, and there was a Sid Vicious episode, and so, you know, my name is mentioned on it, so I was laughing. But you know, there's this guy that still claims he was the only person there. Like, even in the midst of like I wasn't on that show, but even in the midst of 5 other people talking about that night. And
you know what this person is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, he's an old junkie. And it's just so bizarre that, you know, like that these people can talk this shit and everyone has their own, you know, whatever.
I mean, let me preface this for the people listening. I mean, if you didn't know, like the story and the truth of the matter is that you were the last person.
Yeah, I can get into it. Yeah, I was gonna actually do that.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, it's okay. But yeah, I'm probably going in reverse. But this is something I've been forced, you know, to think about and talk about quite a bit in my life. And I have a diary from then. I should grab that. I had a very weird dream about this whole thing. But like, you know, in the early 80s. But in, you know, in 1979, I had befriended Sid Vicious and his mother, who was, unlike what all these jerks like to say, she was very nice. You know, she had problems. Everybody has problems, believe it or not, even when they're a mother.
Right.
You know, people love to like put this horrible thing on her. You know what I mean? And everyone I grew up with, half of the people either had a mother like that or became a mother like that, you know. And you know, it's just life. Shit happens, you know.
Right.
She was kind of messed up when she was younger, and she had a kid, and he was around her messed upness, and you know. But then, you know, you meet people later, and people change. You know what I mean? They get a little more graceful with age, and they, you know, learn life, and or not, or do whatever they do, and whatever. So his mom was really hip, and you know, we just met them. My friend Eileen Polk, who took a lot of those photos of Sid that you see, like picked Sid and Johnny Thunders and whatever, and a lot of other photos that you might see. And she was like the manager of my band, and I lived at her house, and her mom had a huge brownstone, so everyone always lived at her house, much to her mother's, you know, nightmare, and crazy parties and stuff. But you know, we befriended them and wound up. Eileen, being the type of person she is, she wanted to help, you know, and the fact that I was living there and also befriended them, you know, I was going to have to be along for the ride. So, you know, we hung out, and then Nancy got killed by somebody who definitely was not Sid Vicious. I really doubt, you know, they were so screwed up that he couldn't have possibly had the energy to pick his arm up, you know. Right. Like, never mind anything else. My theory, as I've said before, was that, and it's very, very much like her, that she probably poked herself with a knife to get his attention, like say she was bleeding or something, and he didn't wake up. And neither did she, because she probably, you know, she had the tiniest little stab wound in her abdomen. If someone was going to kill someone, they wouldn't like tap them with the edge of a knife, you know what I mean? They would stab them, you know. But she had this little tiny cut, but she nodded out and in the bathroom and just bled out because she was out cold, you know what I mean? On drugs, so that's what happened, in my opinion. But imagine I was maybe 18 or I was 19. Sid was 21. Think about it, like if you meet a 21-year-old, you know what I mean? And then you think of Sid Vicious in your head, you know, like this huge, bigger than life figure. Right. You know what I mean? But he was actually a kid with no life experience, who's just barely legal, you know,
in a new big country.
Yeah, and having had a horrible experience with his winding up in his favorite group in the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
and it completely disintegrated before his eyes, as did he. And then being with her, and then this murder scandal, like, and you're in fucking America, and you're, you know, accused of murder, and like you're in prison, the worst prison ever, ever, ever. God, we used to visit him at Rikers Island. So scary. Get on this bus with all these creepy people stuffing stuff that, God knows what, bundles of heroin and stuff in their bras and in their socks. We're getting ready to give it to their, the people they're visiting or whatever. It's so crazy. And,
that era especially had to be probably one of the most ruthless eras in history for New York, and that time, like, I couldn't imagine how crazy it was.
New York at that time, for people who don't know, what it was like, literally like the end of the world in a movie, like bombed out buildings, junkies everywhere, like, and people living in not just squatters, but like people like living in like kind of buildings with literally that had burnt down to a crisp, that there was almost nothing left of, and that they was never going to fix. And the president is a famous there's a famous headline on the front page of the Daily newspaper that said, like, "President to New York, drop dead." Because it was just like, forget it. It was so, but also a really great time to be there. It was like a complete free for all. It's why punk and all the artistic and everything happened there. It would never have happened otherwise, It just, because it was, 6 people could live in an apartment for $150 a month, you know what I mean, and do nothing, and just create, be musicians, be artists, be whatever it is, and that is what we did. So I didn't really live anywhere for years. And most people didn't, but nonetheless, you can only imagine the police department at that time. Really was like, if you ever seen the movie Fort Apache, The Bronx?
Yeah.
It's like, that's really what it was like.
That was correct. Hookers
with razor blades in their wigs. I was a lookout for hookers that I wound up living with. Like, my life was so demented. I can't even tell you. And the hookers then were on St. Mark's Place. It wasn't even like, on the West Side Highway on 40th Street or something. It was like on St. Mark's Place on 3rd Avenue, like where Continental is. It was crazy back then. And, but, Sid was in a serious nightmare. And he was in prison, and everything became very real, Imagine you get on drugs, you're a young kid, you get on drugs, and everything I just said happens while you're in a drug dream world, and you wake up from that whole thing as a rock star in prison.
Ultimate nightmare.
So weird. I mean, like, it's like a Philip K. Dick book or something. It's just terrible, terrible. And it was, and we would go visit him, and you'd have to take this bus across this bridge with all the families of all the criminals. And as I was saying before, and it was just very scary. I mean, it felt like you were possibly never going to leave there when you were on your way over there. You know what I mean? Felt like you were going to prison, and I guess you were. But I mean, you know, as a prisoner, and you know, he was just a kid. You know what I mean? And a miserable. And people in there, I'm sure they thought he was a millionaire, and I'm sure they thought he was, you know, whatever, rich and famous rock star,
or just a devil.
Or what?
I said, or just a devil, from all the stuff that the news were spitting out.
Well, yeah, but they were all way worse than he was, so it wasn't. You know, we're talking a heavy prison there. You know, so you know they were just hassling him. You know, and he's kicking some crazy drug habit, and you know, the worst. Everything about it is the worst. You know, and you know, it's just a mass confusion. But so he finally got out of prison, and it's referred to as a party, but it wasn't a party. It was just like hey, you know, there's a handful of people here that, you know, you can trust, and let's just have a nice night. You know what I mean? Which we didn't have. But you know, my Eileen and went out and bought food, and Sid in the meantime, after Nancy died, Sid started seeing this girl Michelle, sort of, and we were at her house, her apartment, and you know, they were going to make dinner and do all this stuff, and we hung out, and then the lying guy came by with the drugs, much to everyone's, like, you know, cringing, like, oh no, you know what I mean? Like, and I was already doing drugs, and even I was just like, oh God, this is going to be, you know.
You had the foresight to know it wasn't a good idea.
Even I was like, you know, bummed out about it, you know what I mean? You know, we're just, but I saw a really good side of him that most people never got to see, that didn't know him from before, you know, because between the time he got out of prison and the time that he got high, there was hours and hours, you know, where we just hung out, and or however long it was, you know, and just, you know, he was just like a kid, like he was, you know, you realize this guy is a kid like me, you know what I mean? And I thought he was old because he was 21 and I was 19, you know what I mean? But, and he was, you know, Sid Vicious. So, you know, I was just kind of like weird. I already had known many famous people, but you know, he was someone I really liked. And, I felt a very similar thing with him, you know? And, you know, he was really animated, and he was laughing and having fun and normal, you know, and kind of jumping around and listening to, you know, the New York Dolls and different records and talking about all that kind of stuff you would talk about back then. And because it was still pretty early in punk days, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just turned 1979, so and it was really an amazing thing to see that side of him, you know, like the normal brief moment, like he hadn't been that guy since before he was Sid Vicious, you know. And then he immediately got high and was greedy, like everyone does. This is when everyone, for all you non-drug addicts out there, you know, everyone dies after they kick drugs and get high the first time and do too much, and that's when most people overdose. The fact, and that's what happened with Sid, but we brought him out of it somehow, or they did, or whoever did, and it was really scary to see that happen, you know, and to think of the monumental, you know, proportions of hell that was, you know, the newspaper headline, you know, everyone was just like, oh my God, you know, this is fucking crazy. Yeah. And he came out of it, but then we left at some point, and he obviously did it again and overdosed in the middle of the night, and his mom, Ann, called us to come back right away before anything. Like, we came back before the police or the ambulance or anything. So it was really, you know, like, weird. And I did this documentary where they fooled me. These people are just ruthless, you know, like, they asked me to shoot a, you know, they paid me to come to New York and do all this stuff. So I was, you know, fine, I'll do whatever you want. And they were like, we want to just talk to you while walking down Bank Street where he died, you know, and where the apartment was. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. And then the next thing I know, I'm being pushed into the apartment. Like, you know, they planned this, you know, without telling me, like some fucking Geraldo thing. And it really blew my mind. So crazy. Like, it wasn't, you know, looking at everything that's smaller than I remember it, and you know, but it was all laid out kind of the same. And there was a little Asian gay dude living there with a dog named Sid. Like, God, somebody get me out of here quick. And you know, it was really, really weird. I had never, ever, you know, I was in that apartment for 4 hours or 5 hours once, you know, in 1979, and all of a sudden, here I am.
How many years later was this?
Probably 30-something years later.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of this stuff was never resolved in my head, you know what I mean? So it suddenly was like being hit by a ton of bricks, like, of total reality. You know what I mean? Like, standing in that room, they filmed me walking. It's in the movie, whatever it's called. You know, I walked down the hallway to where he overdosed. And, it's just so creepy to me. I just
what a crazy setup they did to you. I mean, that's pretty ballsy.
It sucked. You know, they called the guy in advance and told him what they were going to do, and not to, you know, like, not to come outside, and whatever they must have told the guy, you know what I mean, and lied to me and said to walk up and down the street to get a walking shot, you know, and suddenly, boom, drama. I guess that's how. And the guy that made that movie was awful. You know, I don't want to even talk about him or give him the energy. Even the slightest ounce of my energy. All I'll say is he did a documentary right after that about Motley Crue.
Oh,
and went from having no tattoos to having an entire Motley Crue sleeve. A giant L for lame. Which is what should have been tattooed on him. Like a Laverne and Shirley L. So yes, it died, and what followed was truly the most crap ever, you know. So we were there, me and Jerry Only from the Misfits, who was my best friend at the time, and my friend Eileen that I mentioned earlier, and we had to follow through with everything, and, you know, help put the funeral together, and And then on a fateful night, we had to drive Anne, Sid's mom, down to Philadelphia, where Nancy was buried, because Sid wanted his ashes. He wanted to be buried there, but they wouldn't let him. So, so we had to break in and put his ashes on her grave. And of course, it was a giant snowstorm. And me and Jerry and Eileen and Sid's mom, and maybe his aunt, her sister, came. Maybe she was still there. I don't remember. But and we drove in Jerry's, of course, whatever car he had, and it was a really far drive, and it was snowing, and it was absolutely, having just described Sid's whole life nightmare of all of a sudden waking up in prison, we were all doing that in a sense, you know what I mean? We were all waking up in a nightmare every day and having to make a funeral and, sneak into a graveyard and, all kinds of weird crap that even though we didn't wind up going in the graveyard, just Sid's mom did, but we decided to look in the ashes on the way down, and on the way down during the drive, we stopped at a truck stop, and I went into the women's bathroom with Eileen and Sid's mom, and they opened the ashes, and I tried to snort them. Which I did a little, and but they were kind of hard, and like bone. I wish I had thought to save some of it, but I didn't. And then we went down there, and it's so crazy what a complete and utter fog this whole thing is. You know what I mean? It's like I'm remembering it, but what I'm seeing in my head is just bizarre, And, I'm 58 years old, and I still have to talk about this so pretty often, you know what I mean? And I guess it was pretty major. Even though, in my head it was just me and my life, and a lot of other things I've been through seemed similar, but different. But you know what I mean? It's like weird that it's not like I stopped doing stuff, and I've obviously done interviews about lots of things because I do a lot of things, but it's just funny that this particular stuff and Johnny Thunders and all that other stuff too, is stuff that just comes around a lot, but I guess that's that creepy story.
Yeah, I'm sure you told it a million times, and it was great to hear a firsthand account of it coming from your mouth. Yeah. With the ashes, that I have a kind of similar story with one of my best, which is crazy, but it's a little more eloquent. One of my best friends passed away many years ago, and a few of us ended up with some of his ashes, and instead of snorting his ashes, we took them and we baked his ashes into a banana bread, and we cut it up. We got very fancy with it, and we said it was a banana bread, and we called it
version of the story.
Yeah, totally. And we said it's a banana nut bread, and Mark, who passed away, Mark was the nut, and we put him in the bread. And I swear to God, I still have a piece of it in my freezer, because every year a bunch of us would get together and we would all cut a little piece off and we would eat it. Wow. Bread, and it's so when I tell that story to, like, I haven't even mentioned to anyone in years, but like anyone outside of my realm, they look at me like, I have 3 heads and it's the most insane thing they've ever heard. But, the people that we experience those kinds of things within the moment, that it's just part of our life, There's nothing crazy about it at all. And,
I think I wasn't expecting the banana bread part.
I don't even know how it got turned into a banana bread.
That's the part that throws me, the
I think
most.
it was his girlfriend, that she was a good baker, and we're like, what are we gonna do with these things? And she's like, let's eat Mark. And I was like, let's do it. And she's like, well, I can make a killer banana bread. And the next thing, we had 2 loaves of banana bread out in Colorado.
I would expect a devil's food cake or something, but like not a banana bread.
Pretty crazy stuff. So you were mentioning earlier that you're a big collector of things. What types of stuff do you have in your collections?
A lot of weird, a lot of really, really weird stuff. It's funny. I'm sitting here. I'm kind of reclining, and my laptop is in front of me, and the speaker that your voices are coming out of, because my speakers are broken on my laptop, is to the left of me, and my phone is right near me, and I have no idea what I'm talking to. And I keep like putting my phone near my face and then going, oh no, and then like talking into the speaker because that's where I'll hear your voice coming from. Like I'm getting really retarded. I collect. Originally, I was collecting records and magazines and stuff and odd ephemera, like since I was very, very, very young, like 8 or 9 years old. And I have over 30,000 records and vast libraries of really bizarre books from really interesting places, and a lot of books that would I should do like a little book review segment on this thing because I have so many books, like creepy, bizarre, weird books. And I have books about books and books about, the weirdest books that you could ever learn about. And I just found a great book, which is some guy would go to the library and only check out books by authors that committed suicide. And he would scan the title page and then stamp it with this stamp that said committed suicide or something like that. And he did a book of just the title pages, like all of them in a row. Like, I like books like that have absolutely no point whatsoever. I have this one really old book called The Day That Nothing Happened, and it's like every minute it says something, but it's like a whole entire book where just nothing happens.
Bizarre.
But anyway, I have a lot of really great, being where and when I grew up and all, I have tons of amazing, how it was like normal to see William Burroughs. It was normal to see all these people, around. So getting lots of really rare books and getting stuff signed was totally normal. Mm-hmm. I collect like really bizarre autographs, of people, odd entertainers, like a why do I always forget this damn word? What's someone who can twist their body into
a contortionist?
Yeah, like a clown contortionist sitting on a shot glass, autographed photos, stuff like that. And like famous, weird, Ed Wood-ish type people and weird rock and roll bands that no one heard of. And I collect art, and I have some really amazing like Kenneth Anger stuff and comic book art and horror, a lot of horror stuff, and a lot of movie posters for horror and sexploitation and exploitation drug films and stuff like that. And
Howie, I am in no way suggesting that you're old, but it would be funny to mention here that you come from an era, and especially an era of the music that we're into, where a lot of people wrote letters. Have you kept a lot of letters from those days, or just weird letters, or have you been into collecting letters?
Say that again. I'm sorry. I went to look in my living room for something, and I left I left
No.
no my speaking machine behind.
No, I said I am in no way suggesting that you're old, but you came around in an era where a lot of people wrote letters to each other, and a lot of people would collect letters.
Oh yeah.
Were you into that too?
Only by default, but I'm never one to throw out something that personal. You know what I mean? I have great stuff. I have a letter that Kid Congo, who was in the Gun Club and the Cramps and the Cave Batsies, wrote when he was staying at my apartment in 1977 or 78, and he wrote a letter back to the Screamers, who he lived with in Hollywood, about this band that he just saw called the Cramps that we took him to see.
Wow.
And he must have never sent it, because I still have it. And I have a really funny postcard from the Germs from 1978. And a lot of that kind of thing, I just found my old phone book, actually, with, just can't even believe who's in there. Like, it's just crazy. But yeah, there's a lot of letters, and also found. I love found photos and letters, and I have a lot of really weird photographs with stuff written on the back. That I sometimes try to piece together. And I collect so much stuff, it's just sad. Like movie stuff, and I collect spook show memorabilia from live spook shows that they would do in movie theaters in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and like a lot of rock and roll paper stuff, fan club stuff, and weird stuff from radio stations, and promotional oddball items. And I've bought huge collections of stuff. And I've also found I started collecting I don't even know how to explain this. There was like when I was growing up, I was into all the same stuff, you know what I mean? But before people knew about it, you know what I mean? Like Ed Wood and all this stuff. I remember the first time they had like an Ed Wood, everyone like kind of recognized Ed Wood, oddly enough, right after he died in the late 70s. And but we were finding those things way before that, just because they were demented, like if you see something, if I even, ever, if I see something like that, I gotta have it, you know what I mean? And I used to go to New Jersey with the Misfits, with Danzig and Jerry, and go to all their secret spots, of where they would find stuff on all these great stores, like with old movie posters and comic books and stuff like that. And it's great being into weird stuff that nobody cares about, because it's cheap. And as we have seen in collecting, there's a thing where, as time goes on and collectors collect, they start running out of collecting stuff to collect, you know what I mean? And
Right.
they go down a level to a little bit more obscure, even though whether that was originally their intention or not, just because you have to keep collecting if you're a collector. I started at the bottom of the most obscure ever and worked my way up, I guess. You know what I mean? So that was my advantage, because now the stuff that we were all into, people like the Cramps and people like, all the weird people, all that stuff is the stuff that is like the super, super high end, like ultimate stuff now.
Are you actively hunting certain things now? Like what's a dream piece from any of the stuff that you collect that you're on the look for?
My basic answer with questions like that is the only thing I really look for is at this point are things that I've never seen before and don't know about.
Right.
Of which there is so much. It's hard to believe, if you type like ugly into eBay, you know what I mean? Or just pick some weird word, the stuff that comes up is just unbelievable. I mean, like really, really unbelievable. But, I have like really crazy, like I would find a lot of unbelievable Warhol stuff in New York back in those days. And similar things like that here in Hollywood too, there's these magazines that came out. It's hard to explain, but there's this guy I know put out these 2 books. They're really one book, but from Head Press, from that company.
Yes.
Called Bad Mags, MAGS, and it's all about these like bad, insane magazines from the '60s, mostly. And there's magazines that are just, I mean, some of the titles, like there's a magazine called Sluts and Slobs. And like there's all kinds of crazy one-off magazines and then other ones from the '60s, like there's these I guess they were these companies, they were trying to it's all really tied together with the sexploitation film industry, you know what I mean, where like they were trying to sell the new kind of youth market, and it looks like it's magazines for teenagers, except it's magazines for dirty old men, really, that are masquerading as teenage-looking magazines. With that concept alone, it just makes me ecstatic.
Yeah.
But then when you open these magazines up, they're just fucking crazy. Like there's some, I was selling a bunch of doubles that I have, and these magazines are like, sell for $100, $200, $300 a piece. There's one called Love In, and like the taglines on the front of the magazine are like blood, like insanity, murder. I have a couple right here, actually. There's one called Today's Breed. Crazy rat packs going places. Wow. Sexville. Who cares? And then it says, It Girls. Shocking. Twist. Strip on Sunset. Adults only. Right? And then like you open these magazines and they're just like, what the fuck is this shit? And there's tons of them. There's ones like on the back. There's just this one company puts out all these magazines. Shocking Reels, Barred, Banned, Shocking World, Wild Breed, Shocker, Nymph, Scanty, Torchy, Today's Breed, you know, like Sassy, Playgirl, Parisian Playgirl, Busty, Lusty, Frenchy.
Jeez.
And I collect all those magazines. And they're all demented about like people on acid doing this and strippers, you know, murdering
Right.
people, and rock and roll, and pictures of some rock and roll clubs of like the weirdest garage bands that you've never heard of, and you know, all kinds of like weird like cultural treasures that are like, yeah. I just opened this one magazine, and it was this Dayglow hot pink page, and there's a couple on a chair kind of looking at each other like, but then the title is in giant letters, is rape with a giant exclamation point.
Oh my God.
But no one seems to be getting raped. And then the next story says, wild parties. They're making it, shaking it, breaking it up. Where the fun is. And it's just like, there's a girl in a trunk of a car. You know, like, I mean, like it's, I don't know what the fuck is going on in this world, but I'd like to live in it. You know, and Bat Babe, and it's like some striptease chick in a Batman outfit, and you know, I don't know. And then this section, it says, extra, the parties go on till dawn. An interesting weekend, all right. And then in crazy giant letters, it just says, binge.
So like what
There's a picture of someone I know in this, actually. I just noticed the guy who was in Rat Fink and Boo Boo. Who was in tons of like really super weird movies, but he was like a biker guy. What the hell was his name again? I was just watching a whole thing about him. My brain is so not screwed on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I think a Boo Boo. You know, and you'll one of these, and you'll be like Titus Moody, like cooking a girl on a stove, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like or whatever, you know. But whatever was popular at the moment, they would just do stuff, you know, the twist, or you know, there's a lot of pictures. A lot of the pictures they use are from movies, which is what I was getting at before, and a lot of the main magazines of these, and this is what I'm looking for really the most is I don't know if you've ever seen that. There's a company that's been around since the late 80s, early 90s called Something Weird Video.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite thing ever. And you know, they discovered and put out, they found thousands of movies in a storage, lost films from the 60s and some from the 50s. That, you know, I have movie posters for that people were looking for decades, forever, you know, like that no one's ever seen, and you know, basically drive-in type movies, or movies that played in Times Square for a week,
Mm-hmm.
type movies, you know, that were made to just play for a week and never ever be seen again. Movies that never were reviewed, movies that never were talked about or even thought or expected to be talked about, you know.
Mm-hmm. Where were those found?
In a football field sized storage space under Midtown Manhattan. And basically what happened is the creeps who made all these movies were so sure that nothing would ever become of them that they basically would never paid for their negatives to be cut, so the company would keep them. You know, in case they came back,
Right.
and hold them hostage. Basically. So basically, all these negatives and all these films were rotting away for decades, and they were all being thrown out. And Mike Vraney, who was a friend of mine who started at Something Weird Video, and he used to manage the Dead Kennedys and TSOL and a lot of bands, but he was a big film guy, and he and Frank Henenlotter, who made Basket Case and Frankenhooker and all those insane movies, who I think Frank is the one who found out about this thing, and this huge thing was being carted off to the dump because the building was sold or whatever it was under there, and they found out about it, and they paid the night watchman like $3,000 to let them have a whole weekend in there, and filled like 2 semi trucks full of movies.
Wow.
And those movies, like every Herschel Gordon Lewis movie, every gore movie, every fucking crazy drug movie from the 60s, all the crazy sex movies and nudie movies and burlesque films, and all the hillbilly crazy movies, like all these insane, like just thousands of movies, and they became Something Weird Video, and they became and from the in their re-release time, they were an honorable company, so they were digging out all the people who made the films and paying them, and also getting stuff from them and interviewing them and talking to them. And through this entire insanity, this stuff became a genre of film that never existed before. There wasn't, people didn't talk about this weird movies when these movies were being made. They were like a secret that no one wanted to know about. You know what I mean? Like, no one wanted to know about these movies, including the people who made them.
Yeah, it sounds like a book by Paul Auster, like thousands of movies that no person has ever seen
about this story at this point, like real books actually. But it's like a very respected genre, because a lot of these movies were really good movies, and a lot of these movies were made by a lot of really famous people before they were famous, under fake names and in different situations, and there's a lot of people. What's her face from the Golden Girls is in a bunch of these movies. There's one called The Rotten Apple, and another one called I forget what. It's just funny who turns up, and a lot of these movies are really good movies. Not all of them. A lot of the bad ones are just shockingly insane. The Girl and the Geek.
Yeah.
A circus geek, murdering people in an amusement park. It's just genius. In a nudist colony, or where he goes to a nudist colony. I mean, like, it's just you just can't even. This kind of stuff is. Without this kind of stuff, I would have no life, I don't think. But and and these movies have all been not only reviewed for the first time, but there's just hundreds of books about this stuff now. It's like its own thing, all because of those two guys. I mean, there has been people all through the years who were, aficionados of these kind of movies, but only people who saw them live in the week that they played in the 60s, you know what I mean? So it was not, you couldn't hand it down. But starting in the 70s, this stuff started popping up, and fanzines like Sleazoid Express and Gore Gazette and all these great fanzines that were coming out of New York, and started, sort of looking into, and a lot of the theaters in 42nd Street, were the people who paid for a lot of these movies to be made, so they had them in the basement or in the storage area or whatever, and people started finding them and they started popping up here and there again. And but you'd call the people. It's the same thing with guys who had like a garage band in the 60s and stuff. You call them up and they're like embarrassed. They don't think you're joking. They think someone put you up to calling them to make fun of them. You know what I mean? And like you're like, no, I love that record. And then they're about to hang up, and it's worth $2,000. Do you have any? And all of a sudden they're like, what? Like, and that always gets them. But I realized that these magazines basically, I mean, I have probably 800 or 900 of these magazines, and that's a lot. And they're really heavy. They're printed on, they're called slicks. That's what they were called when they were being put out. There's like, they're printed on really heavy, slick paper. So they never are in bad condition because they're really thick and coated, but they're really heavy. So like, if you a magazine box with these magazines, the sides rip off all the time. You know what I mean? Like, they're a big pain in the ass. But there's like hundreds of titles, like Wildest Films and Wild Film Reviews and Shocking Films and Naked Films and And just like all the other stuff, these movies were made. I mean, these magazines were made to, to sell just like any other nudie magazines. You know what I mean? They just had an extra bit to them. And that extra bit was thought of by one of the most famous guys, Dave Friedman, who produced all the Herschel Gordon Lewis movies like Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, and all those famous movies, those and stuff. And in my opinion, what I think happened is that he approached some of his friends in the magazine biz and just said, hey, look, I have an idea. We can cut out every expense. Photographers, models, film, which was very expensive back then. Cut everything out. And all you'd have to do is put out a magazine and make money. We'll give you the photographs the still photos from the movies we're making, which are all naked people, pretty much, and blood and gore and sensational insanity. And you can have your nudie magazines and not have to pay anyone for anything, and we'll get some publicity. And I'm sure that's how these magazines came about. But it was such a great idea that it went on and another title and another title. There's so much of this stuff. There is thousands and thousands of these movies. It's so unbelievable. There's more lost films than there are found films, and I own probably 3,000 or 4,000 of them, of these movies, and the only real in time of reality consciousness of this entire, what I call that whole entire something weird universe, is in these magazines. You know what I mean? It's the only way anyone in the future could ever possibly know that this thing actually happened when it happened. So it's kind of amazing because nobody knew about these magazines until the 80s, maybe.
And so you're almost like the custodian of like a majority of this type. Are there there are other massive collections out there that you know of? People in the same, I guess, level of you as collectors?
Yeah, it's funny now with Facebook and the internet, and you got to remember when I started collecting stuff, I was just out in the street, walking around, looking literally blindly, like, for some store to open up or something, you know what I mean? Like, you'd pass places or people were used to sell stuff on the street, in those days. And someone would find out about a guy who had some stuff or whatever, you know what I mean? And that's how you would do this, you know what I mean? It's so different now. But through Facebook and stuff, you know, there's a lot of collectors and a lot of people have gotten together, and a lot of good stuff has come about because of it.
What's get lost is the fact that there's always a story to finding something super rare as well.
Yeah, and that's what's lost in the internet, sort of thing. Even though I have some, you know, there's good internet stories too. You know, about fooling. I've had a few amazing things happen on eBay that are pretty funny, like telling a bit of a fib to some seller and forcing him to sell me something, you know, that everyone I know is looking at and trying to buy. You know, like crazy. My father's gonna die, and I have to give this to him as a gift. You know, like... And then everyone you know is like, "Wait, that thing was on eBay, and it's gone. Somebody, who the fuck?" And just like, you know. And then busting it out like 2 weeks later after I get it in the mail of me holding it, and everyone hating my guts, you know. But you know, it's funny because there's a lot of crossover. You know, like I never knew, you know, Tesco V, and the Meatmen and stuff. You know, who I totally know of and know, but I never knew he's like one of the biggest collectors ever in the world of like really crazy monster toys and stuff, which I also collect. And you know, he has one of the greatest collections I've ever seen, like that dwarfs, as far as that one thing anyway, the stuff that I collect, but is very, very much similar to what I collect. So, you know, you never know. I've made a lot of funny connections like that on the internet.
You said dwarfs? I'm sorry, did you say dwarfs?
When?
No, so he collects dwarfs.
Oh, yeah, his collection dwarfs my collection. You know, like meaning.
Yeah. Right. Now I get you.
10 times as much.
Oh, I was starting to think about the movie, The Sinful Dwarf.
Oh, okay. So that's a Something Weird movie originally.
Oh, yeah. The mother of all dwarf exploitation films.
There you go. They're Something Weird was the first people to find that and put that out. So that's exactly. You see that they put that out with the little doll of the dwarf?
Yeah. It's perfection.
Which I have, of course.
I think I might have the poster for it.
Yeah?
Yeah.
That's a really sick movie. And they just put out this other movie called Anthropophagus, with that guy who eats his own guts. And it has that one scene where he rips a baby out of a pregnant woman and eats it, and it's so horrible. And it's actually even more horrible because it just came out, and there's a doll of him that they also put out, which is funny, and they have his guts coming out of his stomach and like a Velcro thing where you can attach them to the bottom of his mouth. Oh, yeah. So, you know, like they're made of like felt or something. So fucked up. But they said it was a skinned rabbit fetus and that he had a bite into it.
Oh, man.
And the guy's laughing, talking about it, and I'm like, oh my God, dude. Get away from my TV set.
What's weird now is that a lot of stuff, not everything, but a lot of stuff has become easy access. I know friends of mine from Long Island that searched for years and years before they actually found a copy of The Holy Mountain. And now like the Holy Mountain is like a click away if you have access to the internet, which
absolutely, yeah. Do. Which is funny because you know who put that out, and the soundtrack and everything was the Beatles. I have the Holy Mountain soundtrack albums on Apple Records, which is pretty bizarre to think about. But yeah, you know, stuff like that. There was a book that came out that everybody had. I forget the guy's name, like something Hardy, Philip Hardy or something. Encyclopedia of Horror Film, and it was very sort of international book, film-wise, you know. And it talked about stuff that no one knew about, like Coffin Joe. You know, you ever see those movies? The Brazilian dude, who I also have met, and who is actually Coffin Joe 24 hours a day, it seems. You know, he has long fingernails for real, and like wears a top hat and a cape everywhere he goes. And my friend had him like standing on St. Mark's Place outside. You know, he would sell videos and stuff in the street, not even at a store, but like just in the street. You know, like he and Coffin Joe was just standing there with him all day, like as a selling point or something. You know, like from Brazil 50 years later. You know, it's just like, where am I? But you know, reading about all these things and then never seeing them for forever. You know.
Yeah.
In that book especially, because every movie ever was in that book from all over the world, and all the horror movies. And now it's just like everything is just being vomited out into, you know.
Yeah, it takes away a lot of like.
But it's also, yeah, people. I don't know. I think the imagination factor is a little lame. But like my biggest obsession when I was a kid, and I also did a sort of comic book about this as well, but it was more of like, it was my version of a monster magazine, of which I have my mother saved everything ever that I ever put a pen on a piece of paper ever in my whole life. And when they passed away, I was looking through all this stuff, and I was such a freak as a kid. I mean, like, you cannot believe how weird I was. And I have all this stuff, book reports about monster magazines and horrible stories. This Easter story, this poem, I had to write an Easter poem, so I wrote an Easter poem about beating up my sister. In a Spanish accent, no less, and I made you read it in a Spanish accent, so that I could rhyme "Seaster" with Easter.
Yeah,
but
that's good.
And I want to do a book of all that stuff. There's tons of it, and drawings of, you know, people with knives in their eyes, and like, you know, I would have been put in a mental institution if it was today. I'm telling you. But I made a monster magazine, and there was this movie called Beast of Blood. And on the poster, this insane, rotten zombie monster man is ripping his own head off and holding it up in the air. It's just amazing. And they wouldn't let me in. And I didn't get to see the movie, and I was so upset. So I cut the article in the news. The advertisement in the newspaper was so amazing. It was printed in black and white and red ink, and it was Beast of Blood. And you know, it was just totally insane. And I've been waiting my whole life.
On. Ready to pair. Paired.
Waiting my whole life to see that movie, and then, you know, it came out on video and DVD, you know. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, we got you. Yeah.
Okay, because my speaker went off, and I just plugged it in.
Charging.
But I, you know, and then it came out on DVD in a box set called the movie's called Beast of Blood, and it's the follow-up to the first movie is called Brides of Blood, and then the second movie is called Mad Doctor of Blood Island, and then the third movie is called Beast of Blood, and then there's, you know, all this shit. And they had the Blood Island collection And now they found all this great stuff, and it's about to come out on Blu-ray from that Severin Films, and they're putting it out in a box set with a mask of the guy who rips his head off.
Oh wow!
And all this crazy weird stuff inside, like you know, a map of Blood Island and all these things. And there's a movie from the late 50s that they're all based on called Terror is a Man, and that's also included, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And what do they call it? The Blood Island Collection. It's like so stupid. They couldn't even think.
Yeah, they put all
Which
that
is a
effort
horrible
into
name.
it.
You know what I mean? Like, and now they're going to all be called that? I mean, like, it's like, come on. You know, they're not thinking anymore, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And all these guys know about people like me, and they just skip over, like, a lot of the extra stuff. Like, if they called me, I have so much stuff from these movies. They used to show all these movies together, like in a drive-in, and I have posters, you know, from the Bloodorama Shock Festival and the Chiller Carnival of Blood, and like, you know, all these like crazy combination movie posters, and the Monster magazine I made out of the ad from when I was a kid, when I was like 10 years old, and like that shit would be great in the booklet or wherever, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like a combination of two things. Actually, lack of creativity, but also everything's rushed now. Everything's rushed all the time.
Yeah, and it's just a bummer that they don't
Charging.
care. Whoa.
Charging.
What's happening with this lady? My speaker, this lady in my speaker has lost her mind.
But would it be cool if she started to say other stuff?
What?
I said, wouldn't it be cool if she started to say other stuff?
Oh my God, that would be incredible. You're going to die. You're going to die. I guess she's right, but you know, not now. Please. I'm gonna get it like an electric shock because I'm holding it in my hand. Yeah, that's gonna be the next thing. The electric lady land
Soon enough.
in the speaker.
Well, Hal, you've been a great guest for us, man. We really it was a really interesting talk, especially getting into a lot of
charging. Thank you. I guess it took a left turn to somewhere that I wasn't expecting to go.
Yeah, but it was very cool because it's a lot of, you know, topics I never really paid attention to or got into, and it's going to give me some things to research and check out, and probably add to my own life.
I just finished. Actually, I might as well throw it in there. Something Weird Video still exists, and they have a website with like fucking 3,000 movies on it that, you know, you can download immediately and watch, or buy physical versions of, and they're just amazing, and it's just somethingweird.com. And I just finished a compilation album, a 2-record set that's coming out for a record store day in November of all the best music from Something Weird. From movies.
So you put that together with liner notes, and I'm assuming, and stuff like that.
Yeah,
cool.
It's really great. And Lisa, the widow of Mike, who ran the company with him for the whole, 20 years or whatever,
Sounds
who
great.
still runs it, and she did all the artwork and all that stuff. So for the original covers and everything, so she did the artwork for the album cover, and it looks like the old video covers. And there's a lot of info and a lot of weird stuff on there, and it's there's actual records. Movies would put out 45s that they would send to radio stations with, back in the day, with the ads for the movies on them. It would be like a 60-second, a 30-second, and a 10-second ad or whatever. But every once in a while, they'd have the music from the movie on the other side, for like the theme song from Shanty Tramp, like, or whatever, you know, like, and these records are so rare because A, the radio station's supposed to send them back when they're done, and B, they would probably make less than maybe 100 of them at most total.
How do you own old records or books that you honestly believe are cursed? Like the book or the record in itself is haunted?
Oh God, totally.
Yeah.
There's a record that has turned up. Started out as a joke. This Pointer Sisters record that's haunted. That keeps winding up for years. Like, me and my other roommate from before Max would sneak it into each other's record collections for years and years. And then we forgot about it, and it somehow, I found it, and I swear to God, we threw it out. You know what I mean? But like 10 years after I moved to LA, I found it in my stuff. I don't know how it got there, and it really freaked the fucking hell out of me. And I immediately sent it to him. But yeah, I have similar things to that book that I found when I was a kid. Like, I have a record. I have records that have like crazy people writing inside. You know, I have an album that I got that has about 16 portraits of Idi Amin inside.
Really?
Wow.
And I have the best one is the David Bowie album Aladdin Sane.
Yep.
The lightning bolt face. I have found out here a copy of Aladdin Sane with a gang, like a Mexican gang logo and everyone's name from the gang written in the white spaces all through this album, on the front and back and in the inside. And it's really amazing looking. I love when people do art on albums also. But I also collect records by, like, what are called private press records, where, like, a complete lunatic, like, in those days, again, it's like, back in those days, it was a huge statement to save your entire life's earnings and then make this giant statement and put out the record that you've been planning for your whole life. You know what I mean? And you can't, usually they can't sing or play or do anything, and they're remarkable, horrifying records.
Yeah.
And they're always signed, just in case, I guess. You know, people like that always sign their records, which makes them really good. And I have one by a blind lady that's signed in Braille.
That just sounds insane.
I have one by a midget that's, I mean, there's some of these records are just incredible, like really, really amazing. There's this band called Armpit, and they made a whole bunch of records that are I don't know what, I have an entire shelf of these things that are just like, you know, giant question marks, even now, you know, some of which me and Max have obsessed on so intensely that they've become hit records in our minds. But that's a whole another subject that I could go on about for.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
But one other thing I was gonna say, which is not, which is just a weird, quick story, but which has no ending or no point really at all. But one of the funny things that I remembered was I was about, you know, a lot of this stuff is from when I was about 12 years old, because I think I was very aware at that point and didn't know anything yet, but became fully aware of the fact that I didn't know stuff but I wanted to know, you know. which makes you in like this hyper sort of mental state, I think. And but my mom's, I grew up in these like apartment complex thing, like where there was these brick houses that looked exactly the same for miles and miles and miles, like very typical of Queens, New York, called garden apartments.
Uh-huh.
Like these little tiny apartments, and there was like just two, upstairs and downstairs, and then next door upstairs and downstairs, and then next door upstairs and downstairs. And the neighbor was my mom's best friend, Flo, and she was like this weird lady with a giant beehive, and she smoked a lot. And I, at that time, hated cigarettes. I made a point of it for some reason, that just because people smoked everywhere, so I could easily eat them all, I guess. And whenever Flo came over, I would make a big deal and go like, I smell smoke, and then blah, blah, blah. But I came home, and Flo was still there, smoking away, and they were talking, and Flo was like neurotic, like totally neurotic lady, and she insisted that my mother lock the door, and which my mother never did, which is really crazy to think how long ago that was. You didn't lock your door. And so my mom locked the door, rolling her eyes, and we were, I was watching TV, and they were in the kitchen right near me, drinking coffee or doing whatever they were doing. And someone starts banging on the door, saying it was Jesus. And I'm immediately thinking it must be a friend of mine or something. And I go to open the door, and Flo screams and runs at me and stops me from opening the door. And finally, we turned off the TV, and like it got really creepy, and he was banging on the door. And then we found out, I think she called the police or something later, and she found out that there was this guy who looked like Jesus and thought he was Jesus on like this total acid freak, a dude who tried to kill a bunch of people. And that's who was banging on our door.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Acid Jesus.
And had not Flo been over, God only knows what would have gone down with us and Jesus. Me versus Jesus.
Yeah, that's a while. So what was that, like the mid-70s or something?
Probably around 72, yeah.
Yeah. Jesus. Jesus,
Typical.
Jesus.
Typical Jesus time that we might be re-entering into now, perhaps. You never know. And that album that I worked on should be coming today. I'm very excited to see it. When does this air, actually?
This will be on probably 2 weeks from this Friday.
Yep.
All right, I won't tell. Well, there's all these weird rules that I never knew about that Record Store Day has. So we were actually not supposed to talk about it until a certain date.
Mm-hmm.
About the Record Store Day release. But I don't know if that includes just talking about it. I think we can't show it online. I think it's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure you can bring it up. Probably just not show the product.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a very cool project you put together. Excited to check it out when it does come out.
Yeah, no, it's great. I didn't know. I thought it was just going to be on a double LP, but I just found out it's on CD also, which helps with the modern world.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that I'm sure I could do a whole nother one of these shows with
Well,
Yeah,
what I was
that-
gonna,
it would be great.
what I was gonna talk about.
it's fine. As you know, with a few other guests we've had on, Max being one of them, and a couple other people, we've already talked about having them back because it's impossible to kind of consolidate so many different topics, especially, you know, I feel like
Yeah.
you're a historian for many topics, you know, that we'd be interested in, our listeners will be interested in. So we'd love to have you back, Howie. You're an awesome guest. Had some really.
As far as just the weird, thank you. As far as the weird goes, I really do think it would be incredible to have me and Max on together.
I think that's our next goal. You know, I'm going to talk
Just
to Max
for-
about that today.
Because you guys
He
brings
feed
stuff
off
up
each
and
other.
it just makes my brain just explode
Yeah.
and like we both start remembering all this
Yeah.
crazy stuff, and
Yeah.
our phone conversations are epic. Like I don't know, every time I'm like, God, I really got to write this stuff down, you know, like, and don't, of course, but it's really, you know, I don't know why, but it just, something happens. You know?
Yep. I know you guys will feed off each other, and I'm sure it'll be an excellent recording. So that'll be in the works for us soon, I'm sure. But thanks
Awesome.
again, Howie. You were awesome. We'll be in touch soon. As soon as the episode gets ready, we'll let you know, and
Okay.
just go back and forth like we've been doing. And Klaus, any last words?
No, again, thank you very much, Howie. This was very exciting. Great fun.
Yeah, it was great to meet you guys. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for staying up extra late for us and getting it done.
It's funny, actually. I oddly enough have to. My friend's dog is who I'm very fond of and who I take care of a lot is sort of dying, and she asked me to come over and watch him when she has this big job today,
Mhm.
starting right at 7 a.m. and it's 6:58 now, and asked me to come by and watch him.
Yep.
So actually,
Charging.
so actually, it's perfect timing.
All right. Well, this is the Stockbury Dark signing off with Howie Pyro. Thank you so much again, Howie. And
You too.
we will
The electric ladies was talking.
yeah,
She
tell
took
her
over.
goodbye as well.
I will. I'll pull her plug out like
Yeah.
you won't believe. She'll never forget it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks.
Hang up on this thing. This crazy modern thing.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. I don't know how to hang up or what to do next.
Just let it go.